Okay, so see there's still maybe a couple of people coming in, so I'll just start smoothly. It's a pleasure to be here, actually. Tried to be at the Red Hat Summit in 2020, but then something happened, and it just happened. So great to be here in 2023. And it's my first talk for a real audience since 2019. So bear with me when I'm a little bit too fast or a little bit slow in my talk. So, but I think we'll get along just fine. So a few words about me, if this works. It worked. Ah, okay. So I'm Eike Holz, working for the Volkswagen AG, which you may have already noticed due to this nice slides, which got through our compliance and stuff. I'm doing Linux since 25 years now, and I realized when doing this talk that's a little bit that more than half of my entire life, so I guess I'm one of the old guys now. But throughout the journey, I always focused on Linux and the infrastructure, really beyond, so everything Linux and installing the things, so bare metal basically up to the operating system. And of course, that included then when first in the year 2000, when the journey around started, virtualization was just getting off, not really a thing. But that grew. You all know that's no data center where there's not any something like VMware or Ref or something like that installed. And of course, automation, because ultimately I don't like to do boring things and boring tasks, so that's a direct subject for automation to do all this stuff. Yeah, and this is what I'm doing now since, I said, since about 25 years. Today, I'm not going to talk much about some technical things, so I sneaked one slide in there where I have an architecture, but you'll see that. I'm talking most about the project and the transformation we are still currently undergoing for what we do, moving from one config management to another. And I want to give you a little bit of background because you might all know VW. It's those guys that build a lot of cars throughout. But we are an old company, and we are pretty big. So we have 650,000 employees worldwide, which is quite a lot. We have 85 years of history, which is also quite a lot. And that builds up a lot of legacy, I can tell you, because we are also doing IT since 40 years, something like that. And it's hard to get rid of systems that are then in place, especially when you have to follow a lot of regulations and laws that you just have to weigh on. So I did a quick search. Only in Germany, when I search car in the laws, I get 300 laws that are dealing with car things, whatever. And when I do the same search for IT, I just get fewer than 100 laws that are caring about things that I have to care about when doing IT. And of course, we have to follow all of them, those laws. And the interesting thing about the laws and regulations is that they are totally, completely different time spans that you have to think of when you are selling cars. And that's the way we think as automotive manufacturer, that we think more than in decades and at innovation cycles of years and then supporting things over decades and not over weeks or months or something like that. So to give you an example, if we sell the last Golf 8 maybe, and you will buy this last Golf 8 and put it in a garage for 15 years. And then after 15 years, you pull it out, refuel a little bit of gasoline, give the oils and all the stuff, and then fire up the car. We are by law, we have to by law ensure that you get the experience that you bought 15 years ago. And if this experience maybe includes a multimedia system that you have in your car that has to connect to a cloud backend, then this cloud backend has to be available after 15 years without patching the car at any point in time. And we can't just say, okay, we don't care because that's the law. So we have to come up with something to deal with it. And again, that's just an example of how we are thinking when we are building up new things. We always try to think about the next 5 years, 10 years to come. How will that be? Because if you go to any digital company like Microsoft or even Red Hat or so and say, I want a stable API for the next 10 years, they just laugh at you. Okay, coming down to a little not so intimidating numbers maybe. So actually, the department I'm in, we are only caring about the on-premise data centers. So of course, we have workloads in the cloud, but I will not talk about those things today. And we have about 7,000 VMs running on Ref and vSphere, Linux VMs, in our data centers locally in Wolfsburg. And they are mostly RHEL 7 and RHEL 8. So it's a pretty homogeneous environment. There are a few RHEL 9 VMs, actually, so there are no RHEL 5 and RHEL 6 VMs left, which is a great thing, but it's mostly RHEL 7 and RHEL 8. So this sounds pretty good. The unfortunate thing is we have scattered those VMs literally over hundreds of DMZs. So we have a famous list of DMZs. That's an Excel file that is a few megabytes big, where there are just the VLANs and IP address ranges and all this stuff. And the interesting thing is, so of course, between every DMZ there's a firewall, but that's not the only thing, because VW grew and grew, and then we merged some companies in and all this stuff, and then we had overlapping IP ranges, so we get routing problems, and then someone thought, the private address range is not enough, so we just take an IP address range which is usually public, but use it in-house and all this nice stuff, which leaves you with a total mess of networks you have to deal with. And this makes things really interesting, because if you break this down, 7,000 VMs over maybe 100 DMZs, that's just 70 VMs. Okay, what's the deal? Unfortunately, they are not distributed evenly, so we have DMZs with very few VMs, and we have DMZs with thousands of VMs. And of course, we have had a config management in place for over 10 years now. That's before I joined VW, so I can't really talk why we did it. So I will try to tell you a few things about it. But of course, this is already there. And this talk is basically about the journey, getting away from the existing config management to Ansible automation platform. And why should we switch anyway? So I just told you we are thinking in big timestamps, 10 years in place. Why don't use it 10 years longer? But we used to do CF Engine. So it's called an interactive session. So maybe I'll pose the question, who of you have ever heard of CF Engine? Okay, that's less than 10 hands. Anyone used it on a day-to-day basis? One or two, okay. Okay, it's a niche tool. And it has an extremely steep learning curve. So whenever we try to implement new things for the thing, it was difficult to find people who can do this. And this, of course, makes it very hard for us to keep up with the demands that we are having in automation. Because a few things we do in-house, but most of the things we actually do to operate our systems is done by some contractor, and it's always difficult to find a contractor when you have some such niche tools that you are dealing with. And it has a heavy focus on the operating system. So if you want to do your automation beyond the operating system, like managing databases or middlewares or such things, it's also very difficult because you basically have to implement everything on yourself or on your own behalf. So there was a discussion, what should we do? And management knew of this and then decided, okay, it was around 2020. Yeah, we should do more automation. Of course, that's a great thing. We should do more automation. And a group of people, and I was amongst them, we then thought, okay, we should look at several products that at the market. And we have had a look at a couple of those, but I will also only concentrate on the part which we finally choose, which is Ansible automation platform. And what was really important for us in this process, and we did this not only with Red Hat, as said, but with other vendors also, it's such a kind of a discovery workshop. So there was something from Red Hat coming in, actually a couple of people from Red Hat, engineers who really knew the stuff, and we had a 2-day workshop in December of 2020, everything online, and it was also more or less a first for them, having such a workshop only online, so it was a little bit interesting and difficult for all of us, but we managed. And basically in those 2 days, we as VW only answered questions about our environment, how it's set up, and we started to discuss what could be potential problems, so what are we currently satisfied with, what was the config management doing well, and what do we want to improve, all this stuff. So that happened in December 2020, and this, again, was 2 days. Yeah, after that, Red Hat took all the notes and all the stuff, and then I think somewhere in mid-January or end of January presented us, like most of the other vendors, basically a migration idea. I won't call it plan, because for a plan it was not sufficient enough, but an idea, okay, how could we move from CF Engine to Ansible? What steps would we have to take, and where are, from their point of view, the most interesting things or the most difficult things that we have to care about to have this product really up and running. Yeah, based on this, then we wanted to do a proof of concept, because after we have got in all the things from the vendors, we had as it's usual in such a big company, you have a decision process, you get the managers involved, you do cost estimations, calculations, all the stuff that has to be done. Talk about a little bit more of that later. And yeah, then we said, okay, we want to do a POC to really dig down and drill into those things that we identified as concerns, which might get our back. So the main things we had identified was the scalability, migration complexity, and the costs. And maybe you wonder a little bit why I'm saying scalability is such a problem, because 7,000 VMs, again, is not so much after all. But if you really have 2,000 or 3,000 VMs and one DMZ, that's already kind of a lot. And it really depends on the number of playbook runs you will do throughout this environment to scale it really good. And that was a big concern for the Red Hat guys, at least, because with CF Engine scales pretty good, so we had no problem with that. But they said, Red Hat guys said, okay, we'll have definitely to look into that to get this away. And we have, and this is again counting on the scalability thing, we have so-called special use case compliance. So actually, there are specialized tools for this. When I'm talking about compliance, I mainly think things like, is my VM configured in a secure way, so no person can log in, and all this CIS settings or whatnot you have to do. And we had in CF Engine implemented basically not also monitoring of that, because there are specialized tools for that, but also, at least for the most things, we had automatic remediation already built in to our old config management. And we did so because we thought, okay, the config management should be the only thing basically touching the systems anyway, so why not build the remediation directly into the config management? And this adds up to a lot of playbook runs that have to then be done, because if you've ever had a look at the sys catalog, there are hundreds of settings literally that you would have to check if my VM is secure to comply with all of them. So this adds up to a pretty big number of playbook runs that you have to do, or at least a lot of playbooks that long playbooks that you have to run. And then again, I said scalability is not only about the number of VMs, but also the DMZs, because as I've just shown, the DMZs are not often are not very easy to reach. So we had to come up with a system where we have a central management hub, and only one central management hub, and also be able to go on all those different DMZs to really be able to manage our complete fleet of VMs. And I already mentioned then the word use case. And this is what we discovered very early in the process when we've had a deeper look at what we actually built and how we will build things up in Ansible. Because the way CF Engine works and Ansible works are completely different. So CF Engine is an agent-based thing, Ansible is not. And CF Engine really, really forces you to think in an idempotent way. So if you want to have basically a sequence built into something like a playbook in CF Engine, you actually have to implement your sequence thing yourself. So there's no such kind of, okay, do those things in a sequence in CF Engine. Which, again, forces you to think idempotent, but it's really hard for administrators for the learning curve because they are just not used to think that way. They are more thinking in scripts, and this is a lot more like Ansible works. So what we then actually discovered in the POC, okay, we can't do a one-to-one code transfer because that would just not work because the way the products work. So what we had to do then and to come up with is that we, in the POC basically, reverse engineered our existing CF Engine promises to see what they do, to really be able to then re-implement those in CF Engine. And this was a pretty hard task because, as you might have guessed, when a system is in place 10 years, the people that build up the system and the first promises aren't around anymore. And even if you have a documentation, it always lacks the most important things you will need. So this was a pretty intensive and interesting time to really dig down, but it had a couple of benefits. I will come to that later on. One of the most important things also is, which I've had here, the better understanding of what is necessary. So why reverse engineering and having really a look at what do those promises actually is there maybe things we don't need anymore because the environment has changed or whatever has changed. So we had the opportunity to really get rid of old things when not doing a one-to-one code transfer, but basically reinventing or re-implementing the actual use cases that we have. And it also forced our administrators to really think a little bit more about why are we doing that actually, because administrators really, if they have a thing that they should just do, they are fine, but understanding why you do this is really at least as important as that you actually can do the things you want to do. And this is what's also very important because that is then a point where which I also mentioned is the cost. So with the use cases that in place, we could basically try to estimate, okay, how long will we actually need to re-implement all our promises? What are the costs and which is the time frame when we can do this migration? And the third thing we then also set as goal and identified pretty quickly in the POC is that we should, and this is basically a no-brainer, but I put it here anyway, is that the parallel usage of CF Engine and Ansible should be as short as possible. So, because if you have two config management systems battling about, over one VM, that's really a bad thing you should have. And I said it before, we are really caring about long-term thinking and keeping things up production ready because, I didn't mention that, but if a production line breaks down, even for 1 hour, that can sum up to hundreds of thousands of euros that are lost. So we are really keen about not breaking things in production. Testing is obviously kind of limited on those things because you won't just replicate a complete car production line just as test production line beneath it because why should you do that? It's just too expensive to do. And there will be some things that have changed in the production line anyway. So we are oftentimes operating with an open heart, so to say. So parallel usage as short as possible. That was one of our main goals. Yeah, and then of course the costs. So this is always an interesting thing, even in a big company, or maybe even it's even more difficult in a big company. We always have to care about the costs and discuss how things go. So when compared to CF Engine, Ansible is really, really expensive. I'm not talking about a little bit more expensive, I'm talking about orders of magnitude, at least when coming down to our installation. And this is really a thing you should keep in mind. And the actual licensing model of Ansible does not help that much because they, for example, if you try to automate network things, they used to charge you on a per port of the switch space for the licenses, which isn't really that nice, but they are working on that, so I give them that. Okay, yeah, okay. Thanks for the intervention. So Ansible itself is not really expensive. That's correct. But I'm always talking about here the Ansible automation platform, formerly known as Ansible Tower. But we didn't even start with that. So of course, Ansible itself is free. But I'm talking about the Ansible Tower that we are building up. So it's really important then to know that you will only save money in the long run. But this then really pays off because, again, you will have more people available that know Ansible. So Ansible is throughout the world. Everybody knows it. There is a really big Ansible galaxy, which really is interesting for us because when the management said, OK, we want to do something about automation, and what I missed to say to you is that they said, OK, and do not only focus on the operating system this time, but also for offering a platform for other guys like the database guys, the middleware guys, the network guys, so that they also can automate their things because they also have the interest in getting their stuff done on an automated way, and they just didn't have the opportunity. With CF Engine, again, it was just too difficult for them, but they hadn't had, and they didn't want to basically run in their own Ansible Tower installation in their own department, which is understandable because they want to care really about the network things or the database things. So this was a big thing for us as well. And with this Ansible Galaxy, even if you can't or usually can't take just an Ansible playbook from the Galaxy and run it straight away in your data center, you at least have the point where you can start and develop your own things or fork it or whatever you want to do. So there's a lot of things that are already there which you can learn of, which is a really good thing, especially for people that are not used to write Ansible playbooks every day. And this way, we can achieve really an automation that is not only what we already did in our department, so like installing a bare metal server and configuring the hypervisor and then configuring the operating system, but then seamlessly integrating that with installing the database, configuring the database, and maintaining all this stuff on day 2 operations, because we only get a couple of VMs per day that are new by the 7,000 VMs, but the most of the parts is day 2 operations on those VMs because you have to patch them and maintain the users and all the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis. So cost always a thing, and this then pays out in the end because all the other departments can also save money, or the speed of things really step up. So it used to be when you ordered a VM from or even more if you ordered a database, you had to calculate that this database will be delivered to your project in something about 2 months. And this has really gone down with Ansible automation to not hours, but a day. I would call it a day where you have your database available. And this is not because, as usual, it's not because of the technical things that are behind that, because that's almost every time very fast, but throughout all the processes we have to comply with. Again, I just can't spin up a VM. I have to create a change and some idle documentation thingy and all this stuff, and this ultimately adds up to the day that you need to get a database up and running for your project. And as I said, I have just a very few technical things to show, and this is basically the only slide where I'm getting a little bit technical. So here you can see this is a pretty much textbook installation of the Ansible automation platform. Here on the right side, you have a couple of the systems we are connecting to that we are using as shared service, like our authentication provider and our MLAR service and all this stuff. And then in the middle, you have the controller cluster. So this is our central cluster where basically everything is happening. And then, of course, the database and all this stuff. And then here on the bottom, shown as 3 separated DMZs, but again, this is just an example, so you could multiply this by a number of n. Those are then the DMZs where all those automation mesh hops or these automation meshes are located in, so that we can actually execute all the things there. And, which was also very important, as I said, we do have this compliance thingy built in to the CF Engine automation. And we wanted to replicate this in Ansible. So we had to come up and find a way how to get information back from those hubs to the central hub, which was kind of difficult, again, because, as I said, we do have DMZs that can't, where you just go into that via NUT and can't go back because of the routing issues you will get, because we have stupid IP ranges, to call it that way. So again, it's pretty much textbook. There's nothing really detailed there. So if you want to have a chat about the technique a little more in detail, just meet me after the talk, or I'm around here the whole week, so we can talk about that a little bit more. And I said we are on a journey. So a little bit more about the journey and the time frame. So I already said we started in 2020. With a discovery workshop, or actually maybe even before that, when in mid-2020 our management decided we should do something. And then in 2021, we built the POC I talked about, where we tested out the things, where we made the deep dives, where we estimated basically how much will it cost, and made a sort of plan on how could we migrate the things based on what we found out on the POC. And luckily for us, that worked out, and management gave them green light after the POC. Okay, you've shown us you can comply with all the things we want to have, and this looks really promising. And even though it costs a lot of money, and it wasn't easy times for VW, it's still not very easy times, but it was even harder back then. We put this off, and we got green light to basically go continue. And then in 2021, all we did basically is building the base architecture, so really not installing anything beyond what we already had in the POC, but more about this reverse engineering of the promises a little bit, then coming up with a complete scheme of how will we build up the actual infrastructure, because the picture I just showed you was not that way at the end of the POC, so we had built it up a little bit differently. And we had to accommodate for a couple of things that we discovered in the POC. So this was all the work in 2021. A lot of documentation has been done. And we started a couple of the processes that you need in VW to bring an application online. And this was then most of 2022, building of the platform. And therefore, there's, for example, things like we have an open source office, so every time you use some open source software, you have to go to the open source office and get the things approved. Luckily for us, a big part of that is covered by the Red Hat open source assurance thing. But the process of getting something to our open source office can be 5 to 6 months easily. Or complying with other such processes is also always a thing that you have to bear in mind. So we have processes for practically everything, so like GDPR, again, open source office, security things. So of course we had to go to our internal IT architecture and had security approve all the things that we are doing and all this stuff, and this can also take months, literally. And then we started really to dig into the existing promises. Again, rethinking how are we doing the things, what do we want to achieve, coming up with new ways to do the things better, and getting rid of a lot of things that we've discovered that weren't such ideal in the old operating system or in the old config management system. So this was most of the time in 2022. And then for 2023, we did the final rollout plan, which is currently ongoing. We've not yet really started the shutting, so rolling out Ansible to all the machines. So we have a couple of machines in test stage currently running with Ansible. But we are starting beginning of next month. And we will be finished at basically at the end of July. So this is our goal, to have only those 2 months in parallel with CF Engine Ansible. And there's already a lot of buffer in there. So if everything goes really well, we are finished by the end of June, which would be a really big thing to have it pulled off in 4 weeks, having migrated all those 7,000 VMs. But with all the planning ahead, we are pretty confident that we'll get this off. And yeah, so why did we succeed? So actually, we've not succeeded so far because, again, as I said, we've not really ended our journey here. But it's just the execution now, which of course will have a little things here and there, but we are pretty confident. And I want to talk about now the last part of my talk, why we could achieve this the way we did it. And this also might sound like a no-brainer. It's mostly about the people. So do your legwork in the sort of that you, before you even put together your team, think about who will be in this team and how big will you have this team to get them all together. And this is especially important if you are building things not for your own department, but for departments beyond you, because you offer a service of some kind. And yeah, then you should have people in there who are capable of thinking beyond their usual working structure and their usual day-to-day job. And what we've then done is we really spent a lot of effort in building the team. Again, this started all during the COVID pandemic, so there were no on-site meetings possible whatsoever. As we brought a couple of people in which never met before, so we had consultants from Red Hat there, we had consultants from our normal contractor there, we had for VW people in there, and those didn't know each other, so that was really hard to pull them all together, because what is the most important thing throughout the complete team or the complete journey is that everybody that's in the team has really understood the goal where you are heading, because everyone in the team, and I'm talking over about, I would say the core team is 6 people that build up the complete thing. And those people have really do a lot of decisions on every day for how the platform will look like and what they are implementing and all this stuff. And if they don't really know what the goal is, they will make the wrong decisions. So this is a really, really important part. So take your time and spend the first 2 weeks of the project just building up your team so that everybody knows each other and knows where you are heading and where you want to head. Then there will be, of course, and I said this in the beginning, so there will be a manager which is demanding a timeline, and he will demand this timeline basically before you even start the project, because he has to allocate some budget. So you have to come up with some kind of gut feeling, and the way I do it usually is I think about that, and then I have a time where I think, okay, this should be able to pull this off, and then I double it, and that works out most of the times. Not every time. Yeah, and then because we are working here on the infrastructure and building really a base fundament of the infrastructure, prepare your complete team, and this explicitly includes the management also, that there will be no visible results, at least for the first half of the project. And if I'm going back to here, you really see the build of the platform just started here, and there wasn't even one playbook running at this point in time. So this all was then here in the late 2022. And all this time before, there's nothing to see, basically. And this is, for the management, obviously, it's bad because they can't show anything to anyone. But it's also not so great for the team, because they also can't show off what they've done and achieved, really, in this point of time. So yeah, this is also a thing you should prepare your team of. And it worked out pretty good for us. And then we did something totally crazy in infrastructure. We used an agile approach. So this has never been done before in my department, using something like, so don't get me wrong, so the team is completely agile and all the people are working agile on every day. But having those a framework like Scrum or something like that, that haven't been done in the, before we did this project actually. And this helped really much, but you have to really keep in mind that when you use things like Scrum or those agile methods for the infrastructure, you have really to adopt them to your needs, because the Scrum methods are basically built for software development. And this is nice, but it often don't really match the needs and things you have to do when you are building on infrastructure, because building infrastructure in a big company, because most of the times you are depending on someone, or you have to wait for some other department, or the hardware gets into the data center or whatever. And so it's not so easy just to grab a task and then go on your own and develop this code and submit it, and then it's fine. So you have to adopt it, but it really helped that we had our dailies and our weeklies, so we can really track the process of what's going on. And even doing this stuff like, as again said, the use cases, we could really break down those use cases to user stories and epics, where we really could track how far are we into the project and what have we already achieved. So this was a really, really good thing to have. And actually, people started to adopting this outside of this project too, which is a really great thing to see. And it really worked out good for us. And then I mentioned it earlier, talking with our actual customers. So we wanted to build a system that not only runs for us, but also where the other people like the network guys, the Oracle guys can build up on. So it's really important to have them interviewed at the beginning of the process, whilst also saying to them, okay, and we interview now to see what your needs are, but we won't come up with a solution the next 2 years. So don't overestimate what we are achieving. But this also really helps, because then you can already build the things that you will need into the system. We already, it was not in the timeline, but we already started to onboard the actual middleware guys last year, and they are already using parts of the platform for their own purposes, because they don't have to migrate. So they are starting their automation from ground up, so they are already able to use it, and that's working out pretty good. And then I said, carefully select the people that you have in the migration team or in the project team, however you want to call it. As said, the core team is 6 people that we have on this, and there's a couple of people then joining and leaving for whatever reason. But it was immediately clear when we started the project that those people have to work together over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. And then you also have, so those people have to work together the next 2 or 3 years. And if you have a small project, maybe for a couple of months or so, everybody can pull themselves together and then it will go through. But we knew that will be a lot longer, so the team had to work really as a team and understand them. And that's also a thing why we spent so much time and effort in really forming the team at the beginning. Especially, who will you put from the current operations into your team? Because the day 2 operations, so they want to have a running productive environment. And obviously, if you never change anything, then it's basically static, and this is pretty stable. So the people that join the migration team from the operations have to step out of their comfort zone, because they have to see and adapt new things. And you really, and they are always, or not, maybe not always, but mostly are the people that are stepping up and saying, this won't work, or that won't work, and due to that reason, and there's this corner case and all this stuff. So they are basically demotivating the other team and slowing things down, but you will really, on the other hand, you will really need those people, because they can tell you everything about the old environment. And if you have those people not on your team, you will break things in production when you migrate. That's just, yeah, it's just the way it is. So You will need them, you will hate them, and so select them carefully when you put them in your team. Yeah, and this was basically it. So I was a little bit too fast. No, not too fast maybe. 3 minutes left on my slide. So if you're interested in joining us, this is our career page. If you like to be in a team, I had to bring those slides to legal and compliance. So. Okay, yeah, and if you have any questions, just join me on the stage or out there, and I will be around for the rest of the week. Thanks.